I think it's good to be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, to look around a room and talk to somebody who may not look like you or may not think like you. And certainly doing that is going to be outside of a lot of other people's comfort zones.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of an ongoing conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion on Simply Tags. In part 1, which was episode 101, we heard from guest Trisha Daho on ways to emphasize and strengthen diversity and promote inclusion in your organization. Today, BKD partners Rachel Dwiggins and JoAnna Simek join me to share their experiences as women in the accounting profession. If you're like me, right about now, you're probably missing those great conferences that you usually attend in person each year, but aren't this year while we're all living in this COVID world together. So, I thought we'd kick things off by hearing Rachel and JoAnna's experience of attending the annual AICPA Women's Global Leadership Summit at the end of 2019, which brings together insights and lessons to get inspired and get achieving.
First of all, it's not something that we do every day is walk into a conference where there's probably 95, for every 100 people, 95 of them are female and 5 male. In the world of public accounting, a lot of times the conferences or meetings we attend are definitely the reverse of that, or well below 50-50. So that was very cool. And then the networking events were very female centric, or even some of the handouts at some of the vendor booths were more like things that were definitely centered towards females. But overall, I mean, there were different tracks there that you could relate to no matter what stage of your career you were in. If you were, fairly new to the profession, or if you had been in it for decades. So I really liked that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Rachel said it's very different walking to a room with 500-600 women, and I think it's kind of refreshing. A lot of conferences you go to are just really male dominated, and this one has a lot of interesting little things that definitely cater more toward a female audience. Like they were doing professional headshots, and they had a little makeup counter and somebody to help fix your hair. I mean, the kinds of things that would be important to women. So I think it's just nice to have a conference that's just a little bit more catered. I think they did a really nice job putting together really some keynote speakers, talked about some major life obstacles. And I think listening to those people can really motivate you in your own career, and you think about, oh my gosh, these people have overcome so much in their own lives, and it's a little bit, cheerleader kind of thing, but I think it also puts into perspective for you the kinds of things that you might be facing.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about what is your experiences like just every day sort of in the profession, or just when you're out going to networking events and meetings, and kind of just the ratios and kind of what's that like? Kind of share your experience.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I'm the only woman in the room. That happens very regularly, especially with meetings and clients. And to be honest, I'm often the youngest as well. And so it's something that you notice a lot when you walk around, that others may not really notice that. Typical conferences might be 10% to 30% women on average, and just the way that people connect with each other, whether it's a small group setting or a large group setting, is different. So like a lot of times when you go to a meeting, a conference, people stand around, they kind of chit chat. They're often talking about sports, and I'm probably more sports oriented than the average female, but at the same time, I cannot keep up with the way that guys talk about sports and their trivia and all sorts of random knowledge. So I think those are great ways to connect with people, and I'm sure there are women out there who are very, very good in sports knowledgeable and things like that. But I think when it comes to conferences and interacting with people when you're in a mixed crowd, it would be really nice if people can think of other ways to connect with each other besides very generic topics, something that might be a little bit more inclusive. I don't think people are intentionally trying to pick topics that everybody can talk about. I think these are all very natural human ways to act, but just kind of being aware of the audience that you might be interacting with and help people connect with each other as humans, as people.
One thing I was going to add is when you go to any meeting, event, or even just a social function, a lot of times you can look around and it really does not matter what the gender split is, but a lot of times the females will gravitate towards the females, males towards the males. And I think what JoAnna said is spot on. It is directly related to those topics of conversation. Females generally will talk more about their personal life, whether it's family, whereas males will stick more to the sports. Yeah, I am seeing, I think, more female-centered events than what I, did years ago. So I definitely think things are moving in a positive direction.
What would you tell me to keep in mind, or maybe some good ways to approach conversations again to counteract that? Or again, you talk about kind of the flocking, and that kind of naturally happens on all fronts, right? But then things that maybe I can be doing to try to help with that and create a more inclusive conversation.
I think the biggest thing is just being aware of it. So, like, I'll notice that going on and I will jokingly break that up and go over to the male conversation and, I mean, just crack a joke that you're going to shake things up. So I think that's key, is just being aware, because I don't really think any of it's intentional. It's just natural gravitation. So once you're aware of it, walk across the room, introduce yourself, start a conversation, something about the local area or the weather, or there's lots of topics that you can bring up that maybe aren't necessarily so gender specific.
I think it's good to be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, to look around a room and talk to somebody who may not look like you or may not think like you. And certainly doing that is going to be outside of a lot of other people's comfort zones. But I think when you talk to others, you'll realize how much you might have in common that you didn't even know before. So it's those kinds of things that make people feel like they belong and that they're included and that they can be comfortable in that room, and enables you to access more skill, more talent that you may not have realized is out there.
So maybe back on the summit and all of the content, and yeah, you mentioned events and speakers and all that. So Rachel, what were some of your key takeaways, or kind of really valuable things that you walked away from the summit with?
Well, there were definitely some task-oriented takeaways, but if I had to step back and think about the conference overall, JoAnna referred to the keynote speakers, and they were phenomenal. And I think my biggest takeaway is that, and this really is not gender specific, but we should not hold ourselves back. Every individual should believe in themselves and not be afraid to take on challenges, even if it is outside their comfort zone. Some of the keynote speakers they had, one of them was, a female NFL official who was told her dream was crazy, I'm sure many times over, but kept on pursuing it and believing in herself and not being afraid to go outside those norms. There was another lady who had climbed Mount Everest, an Olympian. So these phenomenal females who had accomplished things that I am 100% sure they never thought they would accomplish, but they did. So I think stepping back and looking at the conference overall, that was probably my biggest takeaway.
JoAnna, what were your takeaways? What were kind of the aha moments for you?
The talk by Sarah Thomas was great. She was very funny, like Rachel kind of mentioned. She was very engaging. Actually, when we were asked to go to this conference, I mentioned to my husband that Sarah was going to be there, and she was the first NFL official. And my husband, who watches sports 7 days a week, did not know who she was. And so I found that was kind of interesting that he never, probably like most people, don't you pay more attention to the players than you do the officials. But one of the things that she said in her speech was that she tucks her ponytail into her hat. And one of the audience members kind of asked why she does that, right? I mean, she's clearly a trailblazer type person, but what she said was she intentionally doesn't want to draw attention to the fact that she's a woman, because for her it's not about being a woman or the fact that she's the first whatever. It's about the fact that she's good at her job and that she knows how to make the right calls. She's out there, she's doing her job. It doesn't matter that she's a woman or whatever it is. And I think for a lot of women, it's a statement that a lot of us can relate to, because none of us want to be put in a position because we were a female or because you had to meet a quota or some kind of tokenism or something like that. People want to be somewhere because they've earned a seat at their table, that they're excellent at what they do. They've got the talent, the skills, they put in the hard work. And so I think when you think about it that way, I really like what she said. Um, nobody's looking to take something away from anybody else. We're all want to be there because we've earned it. We want a spot at the table. One of the things that another one of the speakers said at the conference was, "We're here to make the table bigger. Scoot over and make room for me." The idea that the pie gets bigger when you're more inclusive. And so I really like that concept and that kind of visualization that, okay, if we actually include more people, we will all benefit from doing that. And so I think when you include the right people with the right talent and the right set of skills, an organization, a firm, a business can really benefit tremendously from what everybody has to bring to the table.
Rachel, did that resonate with you as well? Like, how does that look and feel for you?
I agree completely with everything JoAnna just said. When BKD first came out with our Sky initiative, I remember several females at that time coming to me, and they weren't overly excited with the idea because they were fearful that people would think they were going to get that seat at the table or get that next promotion simply based on their gender versus, all of their accomplishments that they'd had. So I agree completely with what she said, but I think over time it's become more and more obvious that it's really more about being aware that there are differences on how we go about doing things and getting there. But yeah, I thought that keynote speaker was. I loved her answer to that question. The reason she tucked her ponytail in was because it wasn't about her and drawing attention to that. She was there because she deserved to be there.
Rachel mentioned Sky, which is BKD's firm-wide initiative that intentionally focuses on gender and ethnic diversity with the goal of identifying and removing cultural barriers and biases that prevent all at BKD from maximizing their potential. Here's Rachel's personal experience with the initiative.
Well, I think the initiative has brought a ton of awareness to everyone within our firm that, I don't think anybody has ever intentionally excluded somebody or made a decision with a bias in mind, but I think it's made people aware of of some of those unconscious biases, maybe not inviting somebody of the opposite gender to a networking event because of a perception or not giving somebody an opportunity because you assume that, based on their family situation that they aren't going to want that opportunity. So I think really having an extremely heightened awareness of those things to where you're not holding back opportunities from anyone based on any set of circumstances, whether it's gender or not. So I think that has been huge. That's where I've probably seen the biggest difference in just opening up the dialogue to talk about these things in a public forum.
On a personal level, opening up the dialogue and bringing awareness to diversity, equity, and inclusion has helped me challenge my own unconscious biases. Speaking of, here's JoAnna with an example of unconscious bias in her own experience.
Yeah, I mean, unconscious bias it's a big topic these days, and I'll tell a story, a personal story, and I won't name any names here. But I was in a meeting with a client, a very important meeting that I had called. It was several of my clients. They were all male, and I was there myself, my manager, who was also a male, and then another partner who was also a male. So there were about 8 of us, I think, in this meeting. It was a great meeting. We talked about a lot of different things. And the way that we were sitting was the client was kind of on one side of the table, and we were kind of on the other side of the table, so a little bit facing each other the whole time. And I sat on one end, the manager I had sat in the middle, and the other partner sat to the left of him. And on the ride back from the meeting, the manager kind of we were chatting about how the meeting went and what he thought, and he said it was good. But he said to me, "You ran the meeting, but the client looked at the other partner pretty much the whole time." And even though I was the one who was talking and asking all the questions and going over things, I think because he was physically in the middle between the two of us, he could notice the shifting in the eye movement a lot more. And I don't even think the client even realized they're doing this. It's just something that happens. Certainly, there's other people that he knows, and maybe he's trying to kind of talk to everybody, but kind of the idea that, okay, there's a woman in the room and she might be leading it, but I'm still directing all my questions and my answers to somebody else. And that's a very subtle thing that happens, and it does happen often. This is just one example of that. And I think one thing to take away is, if you're in a meeting and you notice something like this is happening, or maybe there's a person who's trying to state an opinion and they're kind of being talked over or dismissed, eh, if you can be a supporter and, not necessarily call them out and put them on the spot, but really sometimes just saying, hey, maybe we can take a moment and pause and let this person express what they have to say. Even just doing that can kind of raise awareness as to what's happening. And it's kind of like, well, when you see it, say something, don't just sit back and do nothing. And really changing that conversation around unconscious bias. And first step is awareness. And the second step is saying, okay, I have an opportunity here to address it and do something about it, and maybe allow somebody to express themselves or step in the spotlight, whereas somebody else may be unintentionally keeping them from it.
Rachel, anything that you would kind of add to that? Maybe either personal experience or kind of, again, working with others and teams and like you say, kind of growing others in your office and beyond?
I've been very fortunate throughout my career to work with multiple female leaders. And so I guess maybe early on, I was probably a little naive myself as to why is this even an issue? Because I didn't really see it in my day-to-day life. But I quickly realized I was probably in the minority there versus the majority, because these little things do happen. But again, I don't think it's ever because of ill will or intentionally, making those decisions. But like we've both said, just really being aware that they're happening. And it's great when you do have the opportunity, as JoAnna said, to be an advocate for somebody else.
To that end, since you've kind of had that experience of having that, maybe that example to follow and so forth, two questions here. One being, how do you think that experience is maybe different from others? Obviously, just beyond the fact of kind of just the sheer numbers and in that aspect, but also maybe how that experience or the experience that you gained from that. Again, someone like myself that I have people that I coach and mentor, and I'm always looking to try to be more mindful of that, particularly when there aren't a lot of examples of other female leaders.
Well, I'd say that's the biggest thing I've noticed for individuals who don't have those role models to look at as an example of somebody that's been there and accomplished what they're looking to accomplish. And so I think that's where the self-doubt kicks in some cases, and they think, well, why do I think I can do this? Nobody's done it before me. Maybe it's in that particular office or the city, or they're not seeing those leaders to look at. So I think the biggest thing, like you said in your case, when you're coaching somebody like that, is to do everything possible to eradicate that self-doubt. And it is possible. And just because maybe you don't have that example right in front of you doesn't mean that you can't do it yourself. Maybe there was nobody else around you that wanted the same thing that you wanted. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just that encouragement to take on challenges, to push themselves to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and then being there to support that.
And I guess I have a tendency, perhaps feedback I've gotten, this goes beyond, kind of sensitivity to kind of the differences in perspective and, some of the challenges of not having other female leaders to follow. And again, that I'm a male and I'm trying to coach somebody that's a female, because I feel like I have a kind of a natural tendency to almost like diminish or downplay that, say like, no, you don't have anything to worry about. You should be, confident or like almost, so again, it's almost like try to, in a way of trying to help, downplay it in a way that almost doesn't make it seem like it's validated. Any suggestions on how to, I guess, to avoid that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think it's about downplaying it, but if there are genuine concerns, I think it's digging into that. What are those concerns, and why do they exist, and are they validated, or what can be done to overcome those? Versus glossing over them that, oh, you should have no concerns, because obviously those are real, but it's diving deeper into those to see how those can be overcome. And sometimes it may be something really minute or misperception on the individual's part too. They may think that there's a barrier that really doesn't exist, and it's more about having that conversation.
I appreciate that, because I feel like, there's like a fine line there almost of giving that feedback and also trying to challenge somebody without, making it not feel good, right? And almost suggest that there's something that further actually unintentionally validates this kind of self-doubt, perhaps.
Yeah, communication is key.
Yeah, here for me, for a long time in my career, I've been in my department, the kind of highest ranking female. Not that there aren't other women in the organization, but just to say a lot of them have maybe not stuck around for the long run. And I think what's really important too about mentorship and sponsorship, kind of like what Rachel was talking about, is it's really everyone's job to be a mentor, to be an advocate, to be a sponsor. You can't just sit back and think, oh, if there's another woman here, she will automatically speak up for all the other women. We've got close to 50% female representation in our group at this point. But if I'm the only one speaking for every single woman there, that's certainly it's not going to be a sustainable model, right? So everybody's kind of got a role in it. And if you're a coach to a woman, then it is also your job to speak up for them, be an advocate for them, to give them those opportunities to grow and to stretch. And I think sometimes it may be a little advice for some of the men out there is being a good listener can go a really long way. A lot of times women might just want, and I don't want to make this sound like a blanket stereotype, but a lot of time women just want to talk about things. And so being a good listener, maybe you don't have the solution, you don't have to come up with solutions. Maybe we don't want a solution. We just want to be able to talk to somebody. That can just really do a lot for somebody. So look for opportunities to be a mentor or sponsor to women. And even though there's a lot of discussion right now, I would encourage people not to be intimidated by that or think that somebody else is going to take on that role. We can each make a positive impact for these things. The more that we can do that as a group, the more that we'll be able to push this issue forward.
Our conversation next turned to a topic that might not be one you'd initially think of as having a diversity and inclusion angle, but when you account for it, I think you'll agree it's clearly a challenge we all meet.
Well, one of the sessions, and this is a little bit more granular level, but one of the sessions I sat in on was about meetings and the volume of meetings that fill our calendar. And I don't know that this is gender specific, but a lot of times your day is filled up with meetings to where then you're constantly feel like you're doing your real work in the evenings. And over time, obviously that can become very overwhelming. But from a gender perspective, it was like really, really take note of the meetings that you're participating in, and are you inserting yourself into the agenda of those meetings, or are you just sitting at the table for the half hour or hour that's on your calendar, which is, not doing you or probably anyone else for that matter any good. So I thought that was a really useful session. I mean, there were a number of things to not just specific again to gender, but really taking inventory of all those meetings that we partake in throughout our, every day, every week, and what are we really accomplishing by being at that meeting? And if the answer is nothing, then why are we there? The piece of that, though, that is more gender specific is not being afraid to insert yourself into the agenda of those.
I can relate there as well. Feeling like you're kind of I actually get my stuff done in the evening because that's like the only time, or as you all know, I've young kids, and so trying to balance that in there too, which again I know is it's typically seen as a women's issue, but I think it is it's obviously also a kind of a family issue, and trying to manage all of those things. It's really difficult, but it makes me think also of another kind of topic where I feel like it's maybe sometimes talking about these things, or kind of having the even BKD's Sky initiative, where it's like it's another thing, or another, not necessarily a meeting, right, but another thing on the calendar, another initiative I have to focus on. And that's where I guess two thoughts I had while you were kind of hearing you talk about the meeting thing that really resonated. One was, okay, yeah, being more intentional about the meetings, because if you're allocating time to things that maybe you really shouldn't be, then that's going to hinder your ability to do other things, obviously. But also that, I mean, I feel like this, while it takes some thinking instead of just kind of being, going with kind of what we've always done. It's really not just like an extra thing. It's just part of everyday life, I guess. Ultimately, if it's being done right. Would you agree, Rachel?
I would completely agree.
Yeah, I don't know, JoAnna, what about on your end? Because I know that at times we're in a lot of meetings together, in fact, and I know we've had conversations about, do we really need this meeting? Kind of what's your response to that?
One thing I like to tell people is, love to have you at the meeting. You need to be more than just sitting there doing nothing. You got to participate. What value are you bringing? For example, if you're maybe a more junior person, you've got to be the scribe, the person who's taking all the notes, making sure that the documentation makes it into the file, making sure that you are following up with the manager or the partner saying, hey, these are things we talked about in the meeting. How would you like me to move forward in this? These are some of the ideas that I had. And that way you are actually bringing value to the group rather than just being in there, because a lot of times I think people are like, well, I want to go and I want to listen. I just want to observe. And that's really like not quite enough to justify having somebody in that meeting. And I think coming prepared to the meetings too. If you're calling a meeting, have an agenda, um, have things that you want to cover. Um, if you need somebody's opinion on something, bring them the things that you're thinking about or the concerns that you have. Put it to a fine point, and I think that will really help people when they are looking at being really efficient with their time, and that you can demonstrate your value to an organization.
Yeah, and on a total side note, we actually went through an exercise during that session to calculate the cost of meetings. Time is precious, right? And oftentimes, if you're sitting in a meeting looking at your watch thinking it's a waste of time for you to be there, it's also a waste of money, frankly. And it was pretty astronomical when you started calculating up the number of people times what their value is over the number of meetings per week, per year. It added up quickly. And I think that was very eye-opening to the audience.
Certainly, yeah. All of our mindsets as accountants, right? That can be a little bit frightening, because we enjoy doing that sort of analysis, but then at the end of the day, also would be very frightened by that, I'm sure, if you kind of actually start to math that out. It's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah, it definitely resonated with the audience.
Would you, like, if you're maybe somebody that's earlier in your career, and again, kind of speaking from both of your perspectives of maybe feeling like you can't, being in situations where maybe you're the only woman on the team or the only female on the team, and trying to advocate and say, I don't think I need to be in this meeting. Any tips from personal experience or otherwise on how to do that? Again, particularly if you're maybe younger and don't feel like you have some of that experience that you can draw from.
That's where I would say the coach comes into play. And I would encourage anybody, if they have that, if that thought is crossing their mind, to, while they may not feel comfortable, asking the organizer of the meeting, hopefully they would feel comfortable having that conversation with their coach.
JoAnna, anything from, I guess, your perspective on that, maybe having gone through that and starting to actually advocate for not being in meetings?
Yeah, I think if you're the organizer, I think you really want to think about who you're inviting before casting a really wide net, and making sure that the people you've invited to the room are really the ones who need to be there. Everybody's time is so valuable these days. And also kind of giving people the option to say no, and being okay with them saying no if they don't feel like they're really needed in the meeting. I think a lot of people are afraid to say no. They accept every meeting invite that they get because they don't want to say no to somebody who might be in a more senior position than they are. But a lot of times, you think about meetings, sometimes you have to go because it's a support of solidarity or something that, hey, everybody's going to be here. I need to be there too to demonstrate my leadership. I may not be learning any new information, but I need to be there because I'm a role model to others in my organization, and this is important. Or, if you're organizing the meeting, just think about who's coming and trying not to take up everybody's time.
Yeah, and I was going to go down a very similar road there, but just taking a little bit different spin. Same thing when you're looking at those opportunities, and maybe you're casting that net, asking for volunteers. Being mindful that the most qualified person may not volunteer for that opportunity, because generally speaking, a lot of times females are less likely to seek out those opportunities or speak up or step outside their comfort zone for them. And so I think, again, being mindful of that, and sometimes it may be we need to reach out and make the ask versus just the, hey, who wants to volunteer for this?
As we wrapped up our discussion, our conversation turned to a topic that JoAnna, Rachel, and I all have in common: being a parent.
I think for me as a parent, raising I have a daughter and a son. My daughter is a little older, and I've tried to the extent that I can to kind of raise her in a way that develops this mindset that she can kind of do anything. I think back to my own childhood. My dad, I was an only child, but my dad never said to me, "Oh, you're a girl, I'm gonna let you off the hook." I was bad at math for a while. And for my dad, who's an engineer, having a kid who was bad at math was just not an acceptable answer. So he actually sent me to math camp in summer school until I was better at math, at least to an acceptable point. But my point of telling that story is that my parents never raised me to say, "Oh, you're limited because you're female," or whatever. It's just, you're just going to be good at this. We're going to give you equal access and equal opportunity. And so I really want to provide that for my daughter as well, and allowing her to choose the things that interest her, whatever those happen to be, and kind of giving her a really broad background and exposure to as many things as I can. I think gender bias is something that is learned. You're not really born with it, in terms of the things that you like to do or the things that you're interested in. And so I really want to hold my kids to kind of the same standard, regardless, in terms of, hey, I want you to be good at all of these things, and I want you to have access to all of these things, and I'm not going to let you off the hook just because you're feeling whiny that day. So I think when you are a parent and you're looking at your kids and you really think about the way that you're educating them and the example that you're setting for them, and then kind of translate that also into your work life with the people that you work with, there's probably a lot of parallels there.
And speaking of raising a daughter, I had one last personal question for Rachel.
Well, I have the twins. They're 5, right? And boy, girl. So with my daughter, I kind of look to how can I help her grow into all that she wants to be, right? And empower her and help her and kind of and shape her, obviously, because she's at that 5-year-old stage, so she still thinks that I'm the greatest guy in the world, which I appreciate because or so I'm told, that maybe perhaps someday she may challenge that assumption a little bit as she gets a little older. Thoughts or advice on kind of, again, it's sort of like the coaching and the mentoring, but ways that I can help her grow and empower her to be able to work beyond some of the traditional and stereotypical boundaries that perhaps that we place on these sorts of things.
Yes. So I have a 14-year-old daughter, 11-year-old son, and I will tell you that mindset will change when they become teenagers.
Oh boy. Okay.
so be prepared. But no, I sometimes, as a working mom, I think sometimes we can be hard on ourselves and think that we're we're sacrificing or our kids are sacrificing. But I actually choose to look at that a little differently. And I think that I am setting a good example for my daughter to see that, she can achieve whatever it is she wants to achieve. But with that said, I do see the differences in my two kiddos who are, different genders. And I do have to push her sometimes to step outside her comfort zone. But it really is not, it's not a different application with her than really inside the workplace. But I can sense sometimes that she wants to try something or do something, but doesn't have that confidence. And so I try to push her outside those comfort zones, even as a child.
That wraps up our two-part discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion for now. But it's certainly not a wrap or the end of the conversation on this important topic, and we'll have more to come in future episodes of the podcast. Please keep the discussion going and let us know what you think of the podcast by dropping us an email at simplytext@bkd.com, leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, or connecting with me on social media. You can find me out on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram, where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.